If you've ever seen signs like these, you may be a victim of bad document design. To keep this from happening to you, stay tuned. My name is Kent, and this is your half-hour call. Attention cast and crew, this is your half-hour call. Half hour to the top of the show. Half hour, please. Alrighty friends, we are back with another episode of the almost complete guide to stage management. One of the things I pride myself in and market myself on as a stage manager is my ability to adapt and innovate to the show I'm working on. As a part of that, I don't have templates of paperwork that I take with me from show to show to show. I create every single piece of paperwork from scratch and generated for that show specifically. There are several reasons for this. Number one, I feel like generic templates lead to generic paperwork. When I'm working on a show, I want people to look at a piece of paperwork and know exactly what show they're working on and have pride in the fact that they're working on that show. That may be a lot to ask of a single PDF, but I find that it truly makes a difference. Number two, technology and stage management practices evolve fast, and templates tend to look dated pretty quickly. After a few iterations, they'll start to look piecemealed together, and in general just look kind of sloppy and bad. And most importantly, number three, I find that starting from scratch forces me to evaluate the needs of the show, and allows me to innovate and make a piece of paperwork even better than the last time I made that same document. But whether I'm creating a document that every stage manager makes for every show, like a rehearsal report template, or if I'm creating something that's unique to the project I'm working on, like a safe scaring pamphlet that's distributed to the 600 plus scare actors at a Halloween event, I use the same guiding principles. When generating paperwork, I use an acronym or an actronym that's 3 letters long. It's ACT, A-C-T. A is for audience. The first thing I evaluate when making a piece of paperwork is who will be using it and who will be viewing it. Is it for actors? Is it for designers? Is it for crew members? Is it for producers? Is it just for use within the stage management team? Or is it some combination of that? Or will it be publicly posted on the call board? All of these factors go into how I make this paperwork. C stands for context. In what situation will your audience be looking at this paperwork? Are they at home checking their email? Are they given a paper copy the first day of rehearsal? Are they looking at it at a call board while they sign in? Or are they running off stage, looking at your running order, trying to figure out where to go next because it's the first run through of the show? All of these things also significantly change how you need to structure the information within your paperwork. And T stands for the T to spill. Okay, it really stands for information, but Aki was significantly less catchy than ACT. What information do you need to convey? What's the most important part, and what's relevant to that information that you absolutely need to have on that piece of paper? Also think about, is it too much information to try and cram into a single document? These 3 ideas, audience, context, and T, information, should be your guide when designing your document. These 3 ideas are why a running order looks so much different than a rehearsal report. It's because there's a different audience, there's a different context, and there's different information that needs to be conveyed. Now that we have our 3 principles that are going to guide our decisions, let's take a look at the different aspects that we'll be making decisions about. The first thing to consider is page layout. Will you use landscape or portrait? What size paper are you going to use? Are you going to use 8.5 by 11? Are you going to use ledger? Are you going to use an index card? How big do the margins need to be? How much white space is there in the document? The next thing we need to evaluate is the font. There are a lot of characteristics about font that you can change and manipulate, including the style, the size, the color, bold, italicized, or underlined, or struck through, and all of those will play a significant role in how the information that you are typing is going to be perceived. In general, I use 3 fonts for all of the paperwork for a show. The first font is what I call the logo font. It's what I use for the show title and the show title only. And I put the show title on every single document and every piece of paperwork that I generate, so it almost creates a brand recognition so you know what show you're working on when you look at a piece of paper. The second font is a title font. That's the font that I will use for headings or for the title of the piece of paperwork. So it'll say rehearsal report or running order or daily call or production calendar or whatever you're generating. And then the third font is the body font. So that's where all of the key information, the bulk of the document, is going to be in this font. When selecting your heading and body fonts, one major consideration you need to make is whether to go with a serif or sans serif font. A serif is a little line on a letter that kind of serves as a way to guide the eye and actually makes it less tiring to read larger chunks of text. However, fonts that are sans serif or without a serif are actually easier to read quickly and easier to read with smaller font size. So along with that, I will usually pick a serif font for the script itself because that's the document people are going to spend the most time looking at, and a sans serif font for almost everything else, especially anything that is going to be very small or things that are going to be read while backstage under low light conditions. The next thing we need to consider is use of color and use of shading. Color and shading can be used to differentiate pieces of text, to draw attention to a certain piece of information, and so many other useful things. However, I have a rule that all information in the piece of paperwork needs to be able to be perceived without color. This is because about 8% of men and 0.4% of women are colorblind in the United States, and much more commonly, you never know how someone is going to be viewing this paperwork, whether they're going to be able to print it in color or in black and white. They need to be able to glean the same information from the document. Shading, by contrast, can be seen whether a document is printed in black and white or in color. If there's any artwork for your production, I like to take the poster or logo and use an eyedropper tool to get different colors that are in the logo for use in my paperwork. I find it really gives things a cohesive look and aids in that instant recognition of what show you're working on. The last thing you need to consider is consistency. This is both consistency across documents, building that brand recognition of remembering what show you're working on by just looking at the piece of paperwork. It also means consistency within document itself. So halfway through a scene breakdown, we don't change formatting, or halfway through the document, we don't change what a bolded word means. Keep in mind that all decisions about page layout, font, color, shading, and consistency need to be made to serve the audience context and information that you are trying to convey. I've already mentioned a couple of them, but there are a few things that I include in every single document, usually in the header or the footer. The first thing I always include is the document title. I want to be able to look at a piece of paperwork and instantly know what kind of information I can expect to get from it. The second thing I always include is the show title. Not only does this help to build that brand recognition, but a lot of theater companies are creating multiple shows at one time or have a season of several shows. And you're going to be sending things like reports and schedules to people that are working on all of them. So it's really important for those people to be able to recognize instantly what show you're talking about. The third thing I always put on a document is a revision date. This way, when things inevitably change, whether it's production calendars or even the script itself, we can make sure that we all have the same and most up-to-date version of that document. The fourth thing that goes on every piece of paperwork I create are the words prepared by, followed by my name. I put this somewhere on the document, often pretty small and in the footer, but I put it on every piece of paperwork. Because especially if you're working on theme parks or cruise ships where the same show might have different stage managers, or if you're in a more traditional setting where you have multiple stage managers within a single team, it's really important that actors and directors and crew know who to go to for questions about that paperwork, rather than bogging down the production stage manager with questions about everything. The fifth thing I always include is a page number, and not just the page number, but out of however many pages long the document is. That way, people not only know that they have the whole document, but that they have it in the correct order. And most important is number 6. On every piece of paperwork I create, at the bottom, in the middle, in capital letters, it says subject to change. Because everything is subject to change. So like I said, the concepts we just went over are going to guide you whether you're making something that you will make for every single show, or something that you will only make for one show. I wanted to share with you a few examples of unique paperwork that I've made for shows in the past. The first one is for a cruise ship show where there were fake microphones being used by dancers that weren't singing, and we didn't have enough for everyone to have their own, so they had to pass them off backstage and almost choreograph these movements so that everyone that needs a microphone on stage for their choreography will have one. So let's use our acronym. The audience was the performers. They're the only ones that are really going to be using this documentation. And then the context they would be using this in is during rehearsals, and then for the first few shows, probably during the show as well. So it needs to be a fairly large font size and very simple to follow along with. And finally, the information itself. We need some kind of identifier for the different microphones, a labeling system, or some kind of description, and then what the microphones do during the show, how it passes off. In this case, since there were only 4 prop microphones, we found it easiest to make columns for each microphone and then use the rows as each number in the show. So once you have the gray microphone in your hand, you can go down column number 1 and see that we're at superstition, so I need to hand it to a technician to track the mic stage left during Natural Woman. I also used shading to differentiate the headers and to also indicate when a microphone is not being used on stage. On the ship, we didn't have access to a color printer, so I couldn't use any color, but honestly, in the case of this document, I don't think there's really anything that needs to be indicated with color. The next piece of paperwork is for an outdoor pyrotechnics show. For the pre-show section, about half an hour while the house was open, we would have performers dancing in the aisles with audience members to try and get them pumped for the show. If you've ever done outdoor theater, you know that weather does not always cooperate, but this show had so many different elements that we could always do the show as long as it was safe to be outside, which means that it could be actively raining and we would still do the show. But we had different contingency plans in case the weather was not going to cooperate. So essentially we had 4 different plans for the performers depending on the anticipated weather. We had a normal show, we had a heat show if the heat reached a certain index of about, I think it was 104. We had a possible rain show, and then we had a rain show. And all of these had different requirements for what to wear with their costume, whether they need to bring umbrellas to the booth, all kinds of different things. So I found the easiest way to communicate this was on the call board. And I didn't want to make a new sheet every day, so I took those 4 types of items and made a sign that I could rotate, fold, and flip depending on what type of show it was. So I do that when I came in the morning based on the weather prediction, and then when they signed in, when they arrived, they would look at the show and know whether to get into their raincoats or not. In this case, the audience is still the performers. The context is backstage during prep, so there's no urgency, and the information is what show we're doing. So there you have it. These tips will allow you to create endless types of paperwork, and even if you come across a type of paperwork that you've never seen before, think about these concepts and make sure you are evaluating the needs of your show so that you can be as innovative and adaptable as you can be. Have you ever made a really weird or unique piece of paperwork for a show? If you have, tell me about it in the comments down below and what you thought about while you were trying to make it. Please don't forget to like and subscribe so you can find out every single time there's a new video with more stage management tips. I don't have a Patreon and I don't plan on making a Patreon. If you are bummed out by this fact, please take the money that you would have given me and give it to one of these awesome organizations, the Actors Fund, Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS, or my personal favorite, buy a ticket to go see some local equity regional theater. It's fantastic and it's the absolute best way to learn how to make good theater. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. My name is Kent and this has been your half-hour call.